Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Venerable Yifa, for inviting me. So for a lot of my career, I've been focused on studying the impacts of mindfulness on human health. And increasingly, I'm turning towards looking at impacts of mindfulness on planetary health because so much of planetary health is connected to human health. And it seems that one of the ways through which we will foster both planetary and human health is through behavior change. And one of the areas that I focus on in particular is hypertension. And one of the reasons for that is that there's evidence that high blood pressure is the primary driver of early mortality worldwide. It's likely the number one driver of cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease is the most prominent cause of mortality worldwide. So it's a big problem, but one of the wonderful things about it is that we know what to do about it, that we can control blood pressure in just about everybody. And that bottom blue box there, whoops, sorry, went the wrong way. I guess that's, yeah. This box here shows what research for decades has shown have been major drivers of high blood pressure. So things like physical activity, obesity, diet, including salt intake, as well as healthy vegetables, for example, whole grains, legumes. Alcohol use does impact blood pressure, as does stress reactivity. And also there's many very effective medications to treat hypertension, but about 50% of people who are prescribed medications for blood pressure don't take it as prescribed. So if we think that mindfulness might influence blood pressure, it's probably going to happen through the major drivers of blood pressure. And so we developed the mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction program that trains people up in sort of key self-regulation skills that happen with mindfulness training. So one is through self-awareness, like awareness of our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, but in a non-judgmental way with curiosity and kindness. And so if we can bring that self-awareness to our thoughts, physical sensations, emotions in relationship to the things that drive blood pressure, will that start to help? So for example, we bring people through mindful physical activity practices so that there are about as many ways to move the body as there are people in the world. And so can we find the ways to move the body that match us and our abilities and what we enjoy, and noticing that this present moment is influenced by prior moments, including the physical activity that we had. So just about everybody feels better after physical activity, for example, and often during as well. Sometimes it's a little harder to get motivated beforehand, though, which can be challenging. And we do similar things around, say, diet, so say with processed foods or sugars, that we can sometimes just be self-aware of, like the emotions, physical sensations as we eat that kind of food. We might maybe get a sugar high, followed by a sugar crash for some of us, and then maybe craving for the next processed food or sugar. Compared to when we say eat fruits and vegetables or something that's healthy, we can feel like a really clean energy. And so we train people to bring their self-awareness to the relationship with things that really drive blood pressure, how they feel, for example, during alcohol consumption, but then also the morning after as well, or with stress reactivity, how they feel maybe when they're yelling at somebody, but then how they feel afterwards too, and how that impacts their life. And so that can allow for insights to arise. And, sometimes I ask, say, just even asking you, if you feel like you have all of these areas in your life like completely optimized, like your diet is perfect, you get just an outstanding amount of physical activity, your stress reactivity, no problem. Raise your hand if you have all of these things in the blue box, just perfect. I've never had anyone raise their hand, including now. And so a lot of us know what we could do, and it's one thing to know it, it's another to actually act on it. And that's where the attention control training can potentially come in. So that when we're training ourselves in meditation, we're training ourselves to place our mind where we choose to place it. And maybe it's on the breath, maybe it's on a part of the body, maybe it's on sound, whatever it is, we are training ourselves to be right here, right now. And then the mind wanders, as it always does. We notice where it went. That's good self-awareness. And then we get better and better at bringing it back and bringing it back. And so in time, we can get better at placing our mind where we choose to. So then, say, if we're in a grocery store selecting foods, what is our wisdom sharing with us, or insight sharing with us would be good. And can we actually act on that insight to, say, select the healthy foods? Or, in the morning when we wake up, we might be like, yeah, it's always good to get physical activity in the morning, but can we actually use our attention control to actually move towards that, to be, say, putting on our shoes and lacing them up and going outside to maybe do some Tai Chi that I see happen so much in the parks around Taipei, for example. And so that's where the attention control training can come in, along with emotion regulation, so that mindfulness training can start to become a little bit like an early stress detection system, so that we can often earlier on find the stressors as they arise before they're maybe overwhelming, and then use skills, whether it's attention redeployment or loving kindness or compassion, that can help us regulate our emotions so that we're more likely to do that rather than, say, regulate our emotions through alcohol consumption or ice cream or just streaming some movie rather than, going for a walk or something. So that's kind of the theoretical framework. And we train people up basically in this program and ran it through a number of clinical trials funded by the National Institutes of Health in the United States. And I'll start to show you what we found, particularly on our primary outcomes that we pre-registered, being self-awareness, diet, particularly the DASH diet, that stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It's a particular diet very effective for bringing blood pressure down as well as blood pressure. So here's what we found. With the self-awareness here, the green line is those that went through the mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction program, and then the purple is the control group. So you can see that we had pretty nice improvements in self-awareness that held through 6 months compared to the control group. And this is a randomized controlled trial of about 201 participants. When we looked at DASH diet adherence, we found that those, particularly with a poor DASH diet at baseline, had nice improvements compared to the control group. We also looked at sedentary behavior, the amount of time that people spend sitting, and found nice improvements in it as well, along with a significant reduction in systolic blood pressure that outperformed the control group. It was about a 6 millimeter mercury drop in systolic blood pressure. In pharmaceutical trials, about a 5 millimeter drop translates into about a 10% reduction in cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. So it's a clinically meaningful reduction. So that's some examples. We also did in our prior clinical trial, we were able to do 2 years of follow-up and also found about a 6 millimeter drop in blood pressure for everybody in the blue line there, though a lot of the action was in people with particularly high levels of blood pressure. Our clinical trial showed more reductions in people with lower blood pressure as well, but again, finding effects are holding 2 years out. So we can take that kind of framework and apply it in different health conditions at different times in life, for example. So say we've done quite a bit of work with young adults where young adult is a pretty interesting time of life. When we think of, say, the prefrontal cortex, the area of logic and reason, that starts to actually mature, like in the mid-20s, for example, at a neurological level. It's also a time when young adults are trying to figure out what to do with their lives, are often leaving home, figuring out their careers, maybe their romantic relationships if they want those. And mindfulness, I find, can be just a very effective moment in the life course to learn at that time. So we recruited a number of young adult college students and really wanted to look at how these kinds of skills could influence what's up for young adults around health, like certainly physical activity, diet, obesity, but also sleep, also loneliness, also digital media addiction, for example, too. And so we ran a randomized controlled trial. So it was college students where we did the baseline assessments at the beginning of the school term. And then we did follow-up assessments towards the end of the term when exams are hitting and term papers are due, so stress levels are higher. And so we pre-registered this whole person health outcome as our primary outcome. That was a mix of a number of those different factors that I already mentioned, like diet and physical activity and sleep, for example, stress. And we found pretty nice improvements in the group going through the mindfulness-based college program compared to the control group that actually got worse as the term goes on, as you kind of get closer to the stressors of exams and term papers. When we looked at behavior change, again, we found nice improvements in sedentary behavior, but also sleep quality. We found that with depression symptoms, that those in the control group depression symptoms went up over the school term, as it gets harder and harder. And while depression symptoms didn't come down in the intervention groups, they also didn't go up. So it was almost providing resilience in the face of increasing stressors as the term went on, and also found nice reductions in loneliness. For example, one participant that went through the program around like the loneliness side of things, she found that she had a friend that she wanted to be one of her closest friends for the rest of her life, and she found that if she really wanted that to happen, she realized that she wanted to be more present with her when they were hanging out with each other. That she found that she was often, her mind was wandering to other things, or she was doing things on her phone, and so she made a point to really be present with that friend, and found that the quality of their conversations got much richer and deeper as a result. She also found that she had a challenging relationship with her mother, which can often happen, I think, with parents, with young adults, and that she'd found she'd had strong reactivity when she spoke with her mom, and that the mindfulness training allowed her to just notice that those emotions were arising, that she didn't necessarily need to act on them, and to understand some of the context around it, so that she found that she was also more grounded when she was speaking with her parents as well. So those are some examples of what we're seeing. I think there's also opportunities for mindfulness to be fostering planetary health as well. And the research isn't as far along in this area, but it's starting to emerge. And so what I'm finding is that there's sort of like 4 different areas that I think there's a lot of potential here. One is with earth-based mindfulness practices. And so, for example, I work quite a bit with Native American communities in the United States, and that we see that there are a number of earth-based practices that are used in indigenous cultures all around the world. So say, for example, with some of the Native American populations, that they have very sacred areas in nature that they will go to for community events and for contemplations, for example, that have strong meaning in their lives. When we think of some of the Buddhist communities, this is a monastery in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen tradition. This is in Southern California. It's called Deer Park, and that's the monastery right here at the bottom, and it's very much set in nature. And so, say one evening, the last time I was there, we hiked up this hill with our dinner, and we ate dinner right at the peak of the mountain and watched the sunset come down. One of the mornings, for example, we met before sunrise in the dark, and walked up this path together and sat down in the dark before sunrise and meditated as day came. And so there can be these practices where we can really connect in with nature in a contemplative way. I think what they're finding is they're starting to do mindfulness trainings in nature itself, and they're finding evidence in this systematic review. A systematic review is where they take many papers together and then combine the results into what's called a meta-analysis and combine the effects across all those studies. And they're even finding that while nature experience or meditation in nature is effective, the effects are twice as large when you get into wilder areas. So mindfulness practice training, say in the wilderness or in the forest, has twice the effect size as mindfulness practice, say, in gardens or parks. But mindfulness practice in gardens and parks is still effective. It's a very low p-value. So it's not like it's ineffective. And it's something that I've seen in Taiwan that I'm very impressed with the types of mindful movements that are happening in the parks around here. The fact that 70% of Taiwan is covered in forest, for example. I've just been in Taitung for the last 4 days, and a lot of nature down there. And so there's evidence that really doing mindfulness practice in nature might be even more effective. We've incorporated that in some of our pilot work in what's called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction 2, where we actually bring nature experience into the mindfulness training and have found improvements not only in physical activity, but also in depression symptoms. I think there are many opportunities for where mindfulness, but really also Buddhist concepts more broadly, can foster planetary health. So say the concept of interbeing, where everything is interconnected with each other. So say if we're starting to use, maybe it's lotions or certain kinds of plastics that have microplastics in them, and then that goes into the water system, and the fish eat the microplastics, and then we eat the fish, and I understand that each of us has about the equivalent of a credit card worth of plastic in our bodies at any given time. So just understanding how everything is interconnected, that the pesticides that many of us use have phthalates in them and other endocrine disrupting chemicals that then come into our body and can influence pregnancy, for example, and the size of our children as they're born. It can influence cancer risk, thyroid function. And so as we can start to look at Buddhist concepts, say, of interbeing, when we're creating products or making decisions for our own well-being, or if we're involved with policy or legislation, to understand that truly everything really is interconnected. There's many other examples too, say, for example, the concept of acceptance, that it can be challenging to look at, say, planetary health. And for those that are working in the environmental field, there can be burnout there or worry. And so can we come to be working with acceptance of this is how the world is in this moment? And so that we can kind of care for our energy and then direct it where it's going to have the greatest impact for our well-being and for others. Impermanence, everything changes. See the change that's happened in our lifetimes and also from here on as well. So these are just some examples, I think, where Buddhism really has a great amount to offer around environmental sustainability. And I understand actually Buddhism in Taiwan has flourished in many ways because of its interaction with nature and environmental sustainability. And then finally, I think mindfulness practices can help foster resilience to the impacts of climate change. So these are some of the early papers out on this idea, but I have a friend, for example, who's working with a small fishing village in Rhode Island, like where I'm from, in the United States. And there, with the ocean warming, the lobsters are moving north. And so there's some traditional fishing communities that for generations have fished lobster, and they're less and less able to now as the lobsters are moving up. So he's working with them to work with concepts of, like, say, resilience, impermanence, self-kindness, compassion, so that they can work through this change and then respond skillfully to be able to shift in their careers to find what works in this moment. So just in conclusion, it seems that mindfulness training that's adapted for people with high blood pressure, it might reduce their blood pressure in part through changes in diet and sedentary and activity and self-awareness. It seems that mindfulness training for young adults might improve what we call like whole person health, including mental and physical well-being. And I think there's great potential for mindfulness training to impact planetary health, and it's an area ripe for discovery. So thank you.